I never thought it would happen to me. But what I found that night was worse than I could have ever imagined. It all started as a late-night search, one of those aimless, bored web dives we all do when we can't sleep. I was on some obscure corner of the internet, deep, buried threads about 90s cartoons, forgotten and long lost to time. Then, I found a post about one show that had never aired past its first episode, a show some even claimed was never meant to be seen at all. The thread was vague, full of cryptic comments about an episode being too disturbing and pulled for reasons no one talks about. It wasn't like the usual conspiracy threads I'd come across. This felt different, real in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. People were warning others to stay away. They spoke about how few had actually seen it, and how those who did were never the same afterward. Naturally, that piqued my curiosity. I had to know what they were talking about. I mean, who wouldn't? The forbidden, the hidden, the lost. It's irresistible. So, I clicked the link. The file was there, an old VHS rip, grainy and flickering like something ripped straight from a forgotten era. I hesitated for a second, my mind already reeling from the warnings. But in that moment, I felt the pull, the same one that had led others down this rabbit hole. I pressed play. The screen stuttered, the audio glitching. Then, an eerie silence descended. And I knew I had just made the worst decision of my life. The more I dug into this episode, the more I realized that the reason it was pulled was far worse than anyone could guess. At first, I thought it was just a typical piece of internet folklore, something that had grown out of control over the years. But the deeper I went, the more I understood that the story behind this lost cartoon episode was much darker than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about a show that got pulled for being too strange. No, it was much worse. The cartoon in question had originally aired during the mid-90s, a time when everything seemed to have a certain innocence to it, even the weirdest shows. Back then, it was easy to ignore the occasional bizarre animation or unsettling character. People were used to weirdness. Shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark? And Courage the Cowardly Dog were staples in many households, pushing the boundaries of what kids were allowed to watch. So when this show, The Forgotten Hour, first aired, no one thought twice about it. At least, not until its lone episode aired. The legend goes that the pilot episode was meant to be a quirky, offbeat show about a group of kids who stumbled into a haunted mansion, trying to solve supernatural mysteries. But the episode, which was never meant to air again, was different. The characters weren't the quirky archetypes kids were used to. The mansion wasn't just haunted, it was alive. And as the story unfolded, the tone shifted in ways that made no sense to anyone who had watched it. It became too dark, too twisted for something meant for children. And when it was pulled, it wasn't because of low ratings or bad production. It was because, allegedly, the entire crew started to experience things. One by one, they vanished. The voice actors stopped showing up for work. The writers disappeared without a trace. Rumors circulated that something had happened during production, something that couldn't be explained, something that had crossed a line they shouldn't have. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was the rumors surrounding the people who had actually watched the episode. They were the ones who experienced the true horror. People talked about the sudden onset of nightmares, where the characters from the show would show up in their dreams, staring at them with those dead eyes. Others claimed to see things, hear things that weren't there, voices in the shadows, whispers from the corners of their rooms. Some even swore that they began to see the same haunted mansion from the show appearing in their dreams. But it didn't end there. People who watched it claimed they felt like the episode followed them, even after the credits rolled. As the story goes, a few individuals, obsessed with the idea of uncovering this lost episode, started searching for it. They became obsessed, almost compelled to find the footage. Some said they had found it, hidden in corners of the dark web. But their lives were never the same afterward. One man, known only by his online handle MNTNT, posted about how the episode had started appearing on random VHS tapes he found in thrift shops. These tapes, he claimed, weren't labeled and didn't seem to belong to anyone in particular. When he finally sat down to watch one, he found himself staring at the opening scene of The Forgotten Hour, the same cartoon he'd been searching for. Except this time, it wasn't just the animation that disturbed him. The people in the cartoon looked at him. It was subtle at first, a slight shift in the character's gaze, something unexplainable. But then, they began to move, not in the way they were supposed to. MNTNT said the experience was like being trapped inside the cartoon, like the characters were trying to communicate with him directly. He reported that he started hearing whispers coming from the screen, voices that weren't part of the show. The whispers weren't in English, but they were clear enough to make him feel uneasy. He claimed that they were the voices of the creators, trapped somewhere in the cartoon world, begging for someone to help them. As ridiculous as it sounded, MNTNT's account was just one of many. Others claimed similar experiences. Some had watched the episode, only to discover that it changed the second time they tried to play it. The animation would warp, the characters would speak in distorted voices, and the whole thing became an unrecognizable nightmare. Yet, despite the horror, they couldn't stop watching. It was like the episode had some kind of hold over them. The conspiracy grew larger. Threads online filled with accounts of people chasing down copies of the episode, each person convinced that they were the next to uncover the truth. But no one ever seemed to come back the same. And the ones who tried to watch it a second time, they disappeared. As the story spread, it became something more than a rumor. The episode became a kind of forbidden knowledge, something people wanted to see for themselves, despite the warnings. And that's when I found myself in too deep. I couldn't help it. I needed to know. The more I read, the more I realized that the show wasn't just lost. It was kept hidden for a reason. There was a reason no one wanted anyone to watch it. And now, after everything I'd read, I couldn't stop myself. The mystery was too much. The danger was too tempting. But I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Not yet. I finally found it. But the moment I clicked play, I regretted it. At first, the search felt like something out of a typical internet rabbit hole. You know how it goes. One click leads to another, and before you know it, you're 3 hours deep in a forgotten corner of the web. It started innocently enough. I scoured forum posts, reading thread after thread from people who had been searching for the forgotten hour for years, each one adding another layer to the story. Some swore they'd seen the episode and lived to tell the tale. Others spoke cryptically about it, hinting at the dangers, but never saying exactly what those dangers were. I should have stopped there. I should have taken the hint when multiple users posted about strange occurrences happening after watching it. Things that couldn't be explained. Things that went beyond just the discomfort of bad animation or eerie plots. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. The deeper I went, the more I realized that the episode wasn't just some obscure cartoon that had slipped through the cracks of time. It was something far darker. Something people were desperate to find, even knowing the price they might pay. The warnings were there, scattered among the cryptic messages and half-sentences. Don't do it. It'll change you. It's not what you think. But there was one common thread among all the posts. Those who found it were the brave, the fools, or the ones who simply couldn't resist the temptation to uncover the truth. And I, unfortunately, was the latter. I found an old forum, buried beneath layers of outdated posts. It had a thread titled The Lost Episode. Find it, watch it, survive. It felt like a sick joke, the kind of thing that might have been written by one of the fans trying to get people to join the hunt. But the more I read, the more I realized this wasn't a joke. These were real people, people who'd managed to track down the episode, people who'd lived to talk about it, barely. The thread led me down a winding path of deep web links, shady download sites, and old, encrypted messages. Each step felt more and more dangerous, like I was walking a fine line between curiosity and obsession. I kept scrolling, eyes wide with excitement and dread. The people who had found the episode spoke about it as though it were some kind of cursed relic. They spoke in hushed tones, like there was something sacred about it. And yet, despite the warnings, the one thing that kept tugging at me was the same thing that pulled them all in, the forbidden knowledge. They were all looking for something that no one else had seen. They'd watched it, and now they were changed. And that was exactly what I wanted. To see it. To know what they knew. After what felt like hours of digging, I found it. The link. An old, broken website, hosted somewhere in the depths of the dark web. The page was dated, full of broken images and corrupted text, but there it was, clear as day. A download link for the Forgotten Hour. My fingers hovered over the mouse for a moment as I took a deep breath. I shouldn't do it, but I had come too far. I couldn't stop now. I clicked the link. The download started immediately. There was no warning. No strange pop-up asking if I was sure I wanted to proceed. Just a single file named the Forgotten Hour _strip.zip. I felt my pulse quicken as the file downloaded. The progress bar inched forward, each passing second feeling like it took an eternity. The anticipation mixed with a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. What had I gotten myself into? The download finally finished, and I wasted no time. I unzipped the file and opened the video player. There it was, sitting there on my screen, a faded, grainy VHS rip of the episode I'd been hunting for. I hesitated. For a moment, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into a dark abyss. The people who had watched this episode were never the same. It was a curse, they said, the kind of thing that clings to you, even after the screen goes black. But my curiosity was too strong. I clicked the play button. The screen flickered as the opening credits rolled. Static buzzed in the background, making the animation seem even more distorted. The colors were off, the edges of the frames bleeding into one another as though the tape had been played too many times. The title card flashed across the screen in bold letters, The Forgotten Hour. It felt nostalgic. A classic, early 90s cartoon, the kind of show that would have aired late at night when all the other kids were asleep. The animation, though strange, had that familiar, comforting feel to it. The characters were classic, a group of kids, probably around my age when it first aired, investigating strange occurrences in an old mansion. The music was whimsical, the kind of theme song you could picture in your head without even hearing it. But there was something off. The main character, a kid with messy hair and oversized glasses, stood in front of the mansion. His face was locked in a wide, toothy grin, almost too wide. It was like he was trying too hard to look happy. His eyes were too wide, his pupils just a little too small. The scene cut to another kid, this time a girl with a red cap, who seemed overly enthusiastic about the mansion's mysteries. Her eyes were too dark, and her smile too forced. Something about their expressions unsettled me. It wasn't normal. It was as if they were acting out roles, but the emotions weren't matching their faces. Every movement felt unnatural. I paused the video. I didn't know why, but I had a strange feeling of dread creeping over me. Something was wrong. I looked around my dark room, the quiet hum of the computer the only sound. I shook my head. It was just a cartoon, right? A bad, old, eerie cartoon. That's all. I was just letting my mind play tricks on me. I clicked play again, and that's when the first thing happened. The screen skipped. It wasn't just a glitch, it was like it was trying to tell me something. The characters froze, their smiles widening. The soundtrack suddenly went silent. The animation stretched. The mansion in the background became distorted, as if it was breathing. Expanding. Contracting. Like the walls were closing in on me. I tried to stop it. I reached for the mouse, but my hand froze. I couldn't look away. I shouldn't have pressed play again. At first, I thought it was just the old, grainy quality. But then, the characters started doing things they shouldn't. I leaned forward in my chair, my fingers tight around the edges of the desk as the opening sequence continued. I leaned forward in my chair, my fingers tight around the edges of the desk as the opening sequence continued. The colors were faded, blending together in unnatural ways, but it didn't seem too out of place for a cartoon from the 90s. Nostalgia, the allure of something long forgotten, tricked me into thinking it was just poor quality. But the moment the characters moved, something felt wrong. The kid with the messy hair, the supposed protagonist, walked into the mansion. His movements were jerky, exaggerated in a way that seemed like a glitch rather than a deliberate animation choice. His arms flailed at odd angles, his legs too stiff, like someone had ripped the frames out of the film and shoved them together. It was a stop-motion quality, but it wasn't intentional. I could feel my pulse quicken, but I told myself it was just the quality of the tape. I had to ignore it. After all, this was an old show. But it didn't stop there. Every step the characters took, every movement they made, felt off. The little girl with the red cap, who had been so eager earlier, began to twitch. At first, I thought she was just moving too fast for the poor animation to keep up, but then her head snapped to the side. It wasn't a smooth turn. It was like her neck had been twisted, as though someone had yanked her head into place and forced it to snap back to face the screen. Her expression remained frozen in that forced, wide smile, but her eyes were too small, too dark. I paused the video, my heart hammering in my chest. What was happening? I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was the creepy atmosphere of the mansion. Maybe it was the distortion in the visuals, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I forced myself to hit play again, hoping that I was just overthinking it. The next scene was worse. The camera zoomed in on the mansion's front door. The soundtrack, which had been faintly playing in the background, distorted for a moment, just a sharp, ear-splitting buzz, and then fell into silence. The silence wasn't normal. It was oppressive, heavy, like the world around me had suddenly stopped breathing. And the animation on the door? It was almost too fluid, as though the door itself was alive, though it seemed to ripple and undulate. The lines between what was real and what was animated began to blur. Then came the first unsettling detail, a shadow. It flickered just behind the door, a dark shape that moved with too much purpose, like something, or someone, was standing just out of frame, watching them. I froze, my eyes fixed on the screen, but the characters didn't seem to notice. They continued walking, the eerie background music picking up again, but with the same strange, haunting melody. Then something in the corner of the screen caught my eye. The frame was small, tucked away in the far right, barely noticeable unless you were paying close attention. A symbol, sharp and angular, almost like a rune or a sigil, appeared briefly on the wooden door. I blinked and it was gone, but I hadn't imagined it. I couldn't have. I hit pause again, my breath coming in short gasps. There was no way this was just some bad animation. The symbol was deliberate. There was something in this episode, something buried beneath the strange art, something no one had ever mentioned. It was like the episode was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. The further I watched, the more I could feel the weight of the atmosphere pressing in, suffocating me. And then came the next chilling moment. The characters entered the mansion. The walls seemed to breathe, undulating, like they were alive. The windows, cracked and warped, reflected things that weren't there. I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck, but I forced myself to continue watching. This was the part everyone talked about, the part that changed them. The children began to explore the mansion, with each room more distorted than the last. At first, it seemed innocuous enough. Dimly lit hallways with dust swirling in the air, creaky floors beneath their feet. The familiar 90s cartoon noises echoed in the background. But then, something shifted. The soundtrack, if you could even call it that, became dissonant, broken. The once catchy, whimsical theme was warped. It felt like a broken record, skipping in places. The sound of heavy breathing entered the mix, slow and labored. I thought it was just part of the atmosphere. But then I realized, it wasn't coming from the characters. It was coming from me. My heart skipped a beat as I looked around the dark room, half expecting someone to be standing behind me. But there was nothing. No one. Just the dim light of my computer screen casting long shadows against the walls. Still, the sense of being watched wouldn't leave me. And then, it happened. In the middle of a scene, the main character, the boy with the glasses, stopped in his tracks. His head turned sharply, almost too quickly. His eyes met mine through the screen. I froze. His gaze, it wasn't just a look. It was as if he knew I was there. As if he could see me. The smile on his face widened just a little bit more, too wide. His lips stretched, and his eyes became darker, deeper. I couldn't look away. I didn't want to look away. Suddenly, the screen flickered. The image distorted again, just like it had in the beginning, but this time, it was worse. The distortion was alive. It rippled, like the video itself was struggling to stay intact. And in that brief moment of static, I saw it, the shadow again. This time, it wasn't in the background. It was right behind the characters, crouching in the corner, its form flickering in and out of existence. I couldn't make out its shape, but I could feel it watching, waiting. Then the character's smile twisted. It was so unnatural that it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a grin anymore. It was a grimace, a mockery of happiness. And that's when I realized something. Something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just a bad episode. It wasn't just some old, forgotten, creepy cartoon. This episode knew I was watching, and it was trying to show me something. Something that should have stayed hidden. The boy with the glasses spoke, but his voice wasn't right. It was deep, rasping, as though it wasn't coming from his mouth at all. You shouldn't have watched this. But now you can't leave. I slapped the pause button, my chest heaving. I had to stop. I had to get out. But as I stared at the screen, the words seemed to stay burned into my mind. The screen didn't just reflect what was happening on the tape. It was pulling me into it. And I couldn't turn away. I thought I was going crazy. But then, I saw them again. Only this time, they weren't on the screen. It started the night after I watched the episode. I couldn't sleep. The images still burned behind my eyelids. I kept hearing the distorted laughter from the cartoon in the quiet of my room, the eerie, static-laced sound of the characters' voices whispering my name. I told myself it was just the paranoia kicking in. After all, who wouldn't be unsettled by something so unnatural, so wrong? But then I saw the first glimpse. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling mindlessly through the comments on old forums about the episode, trying to convince myself that everything would be fine. It was just a cartoon, I kept repeating. Nothing more. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the little girl from the episode. She was standing in the doorway of my room, her wide, vacant eyes staring right through me. She had the same bright red cap, the same eerie, unblinking smile. I blinked, and she was gone. I rushed to the doorway, my pulse racing, but no one was there. The hallway was empty. The house was silent. Too silent. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was the stress of what I had watched, or maybe I was just sleep-deprived. But over the next few days, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. I started hearing strange noises in my apartment, scratching sounds from the walls, faint whispers that seemed to come from behind me, like voices coming from just out of reach. But when I turned around, no one was there. I thought I was losing it. It got worse when I went out in public. I remember walking down the street, past the corner store where I usually buy my coffee. And for a split second, I saw the boy with glasses, his face, pale and lifeless, reflected in the store window, staring at me. I froze. The reflection didn't make sense. He wasn't in the window, not really. It was just the reflection of the empty street. But he was there, watching me, his grin too wide, too stretched. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear my head, but when I looked again, the reflection was gone. But the feeling lingered. I could feel his eyes on me. I couldn't shake the thought that the episode wasn't done with me. That someone, was following me. I began searching online, digging deeper into the history of the show, reading every urban legend, every thread from the people who dared to watch the episode before me. That's when I found a chilling post. It was short, almost cryptic. Once you watch it, you can't escape. It's not just the show. It's the curse that comes with it. It was followed by a few other similar comments. People describing how they had watched the episode and felt their world slowly unravel. Some even mentioned seeing the characters in their dreams, or worse, in real life. There were others who claimed to have never been the same after watching it. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me as I read. What had I done? The more I read, the more obsessed I became. I couldn't stop. The more I looked into the rumors, the more my paranoia grew. There were whispers about a ritual of sorts, something you had to do to reverse the curse, but no one had been able to explain it fully. The details were vague, scattered, as if the people who had tried to escape were too afraid to speak. Days passed, but I felt like I was slipping further and further away from reality. My life started to feel like a blur, a series of disconnected moments strung together by flashes of horror. Then the hallucinations began. It was subtle at first, just out of the corner of my eye, like the characters from the show were walking around me, hiding in the shadows of my home. At night, I could hear them. Their voices, twisted, garbled, would slip into my dreams. I could hear their footsteps as they circled my bed, the heavy thudding of their presence filling the room. I would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping, convinced they were standing beside me, watching. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the truth was, I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The girl with the red cap. Her face would appear in reflections, in the fog on my bathroom mirror, or behind the window of my apartment when the sun was just setting. Her eyes would follow me. I could see her through the glass, watching me as I moved. And the boy with glasses? He started appearing in more places. On my phone screen when I opened an app, in the cracks of the walls at night, in the reflection of my computer screen. It wasn't just that I could see them. It was that they were looking at me, waiting for me to come to them. My obsession with the episode reached its peak when I started hearing voices, clear, distinct voices from the characters. They call me by name. Sometimes, they would whisper my name in a sing-song voice, and other times, they would just say, "You're next." I was afraid to leave my apartment. Every shadow seemed to hide something. Every flicker of the lights felt like a signal, a warning. I couldn't remember when it all started to feel like a nightmare. Had it been after the episode? Or had it been slowly building before, and I was just too blind to see it? I couldn't escape. I knew that now. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that if I just stopped obsessing over the episode, it would end. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized there was no escape. I had opened a door, and now something was waiting for me on the other side. Something far worse than I could have imagined. Something from the screen. What I found was far worse than I could have imagined. The show wasn't a mistake. It was made to do this. I didn't want to believe it at first. It felt impossible. The more I searched, the more I found. The pieces didn't fit together, and yet, every time I found a new piece of information, I felt the terrifying weight of it all pressing down on me. It wasn't just some forgotten relic of a bygone era. It was intentional. Every frame, every movement, every distorted sound in the episode had been carefully crafted to disturb, to manipulate, to destroy. I had stumbled across a few old fan sites, some of them dedicated to the show, others just half-baked conspiracy theories. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became. The cartoon was more than just an oddity from the 90s. It was part of something much darker. I found an old forum post, buried beneath pages of half-baked theories, a chilling confession from someone who claimed to have been a part of the show's creation. The post was written in a frenzied, almost panicked tone, as though the person couldn't stop typing, couldn't stop spilling the truth before they were stopped. They claimed the cartoon was never meant to air. It had been created under the guise of an innocent children's show, but that was the cover. The real purpose was far more sinister. The creators, they said, were part of a secretive group, a cult, perhaps, who believed that the human mind could be manipulated and controlled through certain frequencies, symbols, and imagery. And what they had done was use animation as a medium to affect viewers at a deep, psychological level. The characters, the music, the distortions, it was all designed to warp the viewer's perception, to trigger deep, subconscious fears. It was a form of psychological conditioning, a way to introduce an unnatural state of paranoia and terror into the minds of anyone who watched it. The post described specific symbols hidden within the episode, symbols that seemed harmless at first, but when you focused on them long enough, when you stared at them for just a few seconds too long, they began to change. They moved. They distorted. The characters, too. What appeared to be a harmless cartoon at first glance revealed itself to be far darker upon further inspection. And then there was the sound. The way the soundtrack would distort, warping into unintelligible, guttural noises that seemed to burrow into your brain. The post claimed that these sounds were more than just bad audio. They were carefully engineered to elicit an emotional response. When combined with the strange animation, they created a psychological effect. The viewer's mind would start to fracture. It would shift in ways it wasn't meant to. Paranoia, anxiety, hallucinations. The symptoms were subtle at first, but they would grow, much like how I was feeling now. I wanted to stop reading, to close the page, to walk away and forget this madness. But I couldn't. There was a part of me that needed to understand. I needed to know the truth. But what I found next made my stomach turn. I found references to a series of strange rituals the creators had allegedly performed during the making of the episode. The rituals were designed to imbue the show with more than just psychological manipulation. Some believe the episode contained a dark, unnatural power, a curse bound to the images and sounds. There were mentions of a binding, a spiritual contract of sorts, where anyone who watched the episode would unknowingly open themselves up to something far darker, an entity that could cross the line between the screen and the real world. The symbolism in the show, they said, was a gateway, a bridge. And the scariest part? The more people watched, the stronger the entity became. I felt the blood drain from my face. Could this be true? Could I have unknowingly become a part of something far more insidious, something beyond my understanding? I continued to read, but by now, my hands were trembling. I was afraid of what I might find next, but I couldn't stop. It was like a sick compulsion, a pull I couldn't resist. The post went on to describe an ancient curse, one that had been passed down through generations. It wasn't just a random set of eerie symbols. It was something far older, a force that had been tapped into for centuries, a dark energy that fed on fear and the disintegration of the human mind. The post claimed that the cartoon episode wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger plan, a ritual that had been carefully woven into the fabric of television and media. The episode was just one piece in a far larger puzzle, and every person who watched it contributed to the curse's growth. The feeling in my chest tightened as I continued reading. The idea that this episode, this cartoon, was part of something much bigger, something ancient, felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But it was the final lines of the post that chilled me to the core. The person, presumably someone who had worked on the show, warned anyone who had watched the episode to stop looking for answers, to stop digging into the show's origins. Because once you learned the truth, once you understood what it was really about, there was no going back. The cartoon is watching you now, they wrote, and it won't stop until you're a part of it. I closed the browser window with shaking hands. But it was too late. I already knew the truth. The cartoon wasn't just a cursed relic from the 90s. It was alive, and it had found me. I thought I could shut it off. But when I tried, the screen didn't go black. It felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. The familiar hum of my old computer, the same one I'd used to watch that cursed episode, had transformed into something sinister. The screen pulsed, like it was alive, and the characters, those twisted, deformed faces, stared back at me, their eyes now wide and unblinking, their mouths curled into grotesque smiles. I could hear them whispering, their voices distorted and low, but unmistakably there. I reached for the power button, my hand shaking uncontrollably. But the screen didn't flicker or go dark. The characters' faces grew clearer, more defined. The distorted, grainy visuals I had once chalked up to poor animation suddenly looked too real, too human. Their eyes followed my every movement, their mouths stretched wide in silent screams. And then, I saw something that froze my blood. One of them moved. It wasn't like the others. It wasn't a glitch or a poorly animated loop. No, this character stepped forward. I slammed my hands over my ears, but it was no use. The whispers crawled under my skin. I could hear them in my head now, louder than ever. You can't leave. I backed away, but the screen pulled me in, like a magnet, like gravity itself had shifted. The air grew thick, suffocating. The room seemed to narrow, closing in on me, the walls pressing forward. There was a faint, sickly glow coming from the monitor, flickering like the pulse of a dying heart. I could still hear the whispers, clearer now, growing louder. You watched. Now you belong to us. I tried to look away. I tried to break free, to escape, but something held me there. The room seemed to spin, reality warping, blurring between the world of the show and the world I knew. I reached for the power button again, but before my finger could touch it, the character from the screen stepped out. It wasn't a trick of the light, or my mind playing tricks. This thing was real. It was a character from the cartoon, a grotesque, twisted version of the friendly figure it was supposed to be. The body was unnaturally thin, like a sickly shadow of a real person, And its face was a nightmare, stretching far beyond what I thought was possible. Its eyes glowed in a way that didn't feel human, too bright, too unnatural. The sound it made as it moved was wrong. Like the cartoon had crossed over, its very existence bleeding into my world. I could barely breathe, barely think. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat thunderous, deafening. And still, the creature moved toward me, its distorted figure twisting and jerking unnaturally, as if it was fighting against the laws of reality itself. I stumbled backward, but the creature didn't stop. It kept coming, its footsteps too fast, too unnatural. The whispers in my head grew louder, more insistent, crawling deeper into my mind. They weren't just words anymore. They were commands, instructions. They wanted me to listen, to understand. But I couldn't make sense of them. I didn't know what to do. How could I stop this? How could I stop something that had already come to life? I was losing myself, falling deeper into whatever this was. I needed to get away. I needed to destroy the device, erase the episode, anything to sever this cursed connection. But my legs were frozen, my body locked in place as the creature grew closer, its form warping and twisting with every step. Then, a thought hit me. It was the only thing I could think of. The ritual. The post I'd read. The warning. The fact that this episode wasn't just some bad piece of animation, some forgotten relic. It was part of something far darker. The ritual wasn't just symbolic. It was real. The creators had designed the episode to link the viewer to the curse. Once you watched, once you connected, there was no escaping. But there had to be a way. There had to be a way to break it. The creature let out a low, guttural laugh, its eyes narrowing. The sound made my skin crawl. "You think you can stop it?" It whispered, its voice like a dozen voices overlapping. "You can never stop it." The realization hit me hard, like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just dealing with some cursed episode anymore. I was dealing with something alive, something that wanted me to become part of it, part of the cycle. The cartoon world had bled into mine, and I was the one who had made it happen. I was stuck in this nightmare, just like everyone else who had watched it. The screen continued to glow, the characters growing more grotesque, more alive with every second. They reached out from the screen, their hands twitching like they were testing the limits of reality, just waiting for me to slip up. But I refused to let myself fall. I had to act. I couldn't just sit there, waiting to be consumed. With a scream, I lunged forward. I grabbed the power cord, yanked it from the wall, and threw the computer onto the floor. The room was filled with a sickening screech, the feedback from the broken screen tearing at my eardrums. But even as the screen shattered, I could still hear them. The whispers, faint at first, then growing louder, like a horde of voices surrounding me, pressing in. But I wasn't finished yet. I ran to the other side of the room and grabbed my lighter. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest, but I wasn't about to let this curse follow me. I set the remains of the computer on fire, watching as the flames consumed it, devouring the last traces of the cartoon's influence. The flames flickered, and for a moment, I thought I was free. I thought I had escaped. But then, through the smoke and the firelight, I saw it. The creature. It was standing in the doorway, its twisted face staring at me, its eyes wide and glowing, unblinking. It wasn't just a character anymore. It was something much worse. And as the flames consumed the screen, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't over. It had never been over. The curse wasn't just in the show. It was in me. I thought I was free. But I was wrong. Now, I see it everywhere. I thought burning the computer would end it. I thought the fire, the smoke, the smell of melted plastic and charred circuitry would cleanse me of the curse. I was wrong. So wrong. In the days that followed, I tried to return to my normal life. I went to work, hung out with friends, did all the things I used to do. But something was off. There was an unease that clung to me, like a shadow I couldn't shake off. I told myself it was just stress, the aftermath of the madness I'd endured. But deep down, I knew better. It started small. At first, it was just fleeting glimpses, flashes of movement out of the corner of my eye. I'd be walking down the street, and I'd see something in the reflection of a store window. A twisted figure, a glimpse of a face too pale, too unnatural. I'd turn quickly, only to find nothing there. Then, the dream started. At night, I'd lie in bed, eyes wide open, heart racing, but I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The characters, those sickening, distorted figures, stalked me in my dreams. They'd whisper my name, their voices slithering through the darkness. You can't escape. I'd wake up in cold sweats, but it didn't help. The images didn't fade. They stayed with me, pressing in on my thoughts, growing louder with each passing day. I tried everything to break free. I went to therapy. I started avoiding screens altogether. But it didn't matter. The whispers followed me. The faces haunted every reflection. It was as if the curse had followed me into the real world, and I couldn't outrun it. I started noticing things that didn't make sense. Little things. Subtle things that left me unsettled. Like how I'd catch people staring at me. Really staring, with wide, unblinking eyes, before quickly looking away. Or how, when I walked past certain places, I'd hear faint voices, hushed conversations that were too low to understand but unmistakably familiar. One night, I found a piece of paper on my desk. I don't know where it came from, whether it was there when I woke up, or if it materialized while I was asleep. But the note was clear. You watched. Now you belong. I burned it immediately, but the feeling didn't leave. It was like the curse had seeped into the very air around me, lingering in every corner of my life. I started to wonder, what if this is just the beginning? What if the curse has spread? I've been searching online for answers, anything that might explain what happened to me, what happened to anyone who watched that cursed episode. But there's nothing. No one talks about it, as if it's all been erased. But then, I found something. An old forum post, buried deep in the dark web. A user claimed to have seen the same episode one watched. Their post ended with one simple sentence. It's everywhere now. And it's coming for you. I couldn't sleep after reading that. I couldn't think straight. It's like the walls of my world are closing in, and the line between what's real and what's part of the curse is growing thinner. I hear the whispers now, not just in my mind, but out loud. And when I look into mirrors, I don't always recognize the reflection staring back at me. I thought the nightmare was over, but I was wrong. I don't know who or what is behind this, but I feel it growing stronger. I see it in the eyes of strangers, hear it in the way people speak. The curse is spreading. And I fear I'm not the only one it's after. The worst part? I know what's coming next. The episode isn't just a show. It's a door. A doorway to something far worse. And now, I'm trapped in its world, whether I like it or not. I tried to warn you, but you've already watched. And now, it's too late.